Welcome, and thank you for joining our TIF Talk today, Endogastric Solutions Physician Edition. Thank you for being here. I'm Andrea Millers, and I'm the Director of Marketing for Endogastric Solutions. Joining me today, we have our esteemed panel of physician leaders and industry experts. We have Dr. Glenn Ihde. He is a general surgeon from Matagorda Regional Hospital in Bay City, Texas. Welcome, Dr. Ihde. We also have Dr. Kamran Ayub. He is the Director of Center for Advanced Endoscopy from Silver Cross Hospital in Chicagoland, Illinois. Welcome, Dr. Ayub.
Thank you, and welcome everyone.
Thank you. And our industry experts, we have Bob Baurys. He is the CEO of 83 Bar, a patient activation company and located in Austin, Texas. He's actually one of our Endogastric Solutions preferred vendors. So welcome, Bob. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you.
And then lastly, we have Rob Gerdon. He is also an industry partner of ours. He is the Director of Sales for Eruptr, a patient acquisition digital marketing solution provider, and he is located in Seattle, Washington. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for having me, and welcome everyone.
Thank you. So our TIF Talks, our goal for these TIF Talks is to foster communication around topics that are relevant in today's world. In our previous or our first physician edition TIF Talk, we had a discussion about the concomitant or hybrid or otherwise known as the CTIF procedure with Dr. Changs and Nguyen. But today I'm excited. We have a great agenda for you. We hope this is very informational, but more importantly, interactive. So I'd really like you guys to ask any questions that you might have. There is a top chat bar to the right of the viewing from the YouTube Live. And if you have a question or would like to say anything or have a comment, please feel free to type in a question in there. And at the very end, we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. So we are going to start today talking a little bit about healthcare consumer behaviors, kind of what's happening in today's world with COVID and what's happening with consumers or healthcare consumers. So we'll start off there, and then we will follow to discuss more specific marketing campaign, if you will, with 83 Bar and our DTC national campaign with Bob Baurys. And then from there, we'll talk a little more about how that is shifting potentially telemedicine into your reflux program with Dr. Ayub. And we'll follow that and conclude with Dr. Ihde talking about new requirements and protocols for elective procedures in the hospital. So again, a very exciting agenda, and I'm going to go ahead and let Rob share his screen and start the presentation. So thank you.
Great. Hope everyone can see my screen. My name is Rob Gerdon, and as Andrea said, I'm with Eruptr. We are a patient acquisition and digital marketing company. So we work with hundreds of hospitals and health systems and providers nationwide to acquire patients for their service lines. We run thousands of campaigns a year. And so we have deep experience doing this. And I'm happy to share some consumer insights. And I will preface this by saying this consumer research was done by a couple other companies. We are not a consumer research company. We actually work on the active campaigns to generate those patient leads, but we do trust industry experts. And that's some of the information that I'll be sharing with you today. So that comes from Klein & Partners in collaboration with DRG, as well as Revive Health. So I hope these insights will be helpful, and I think you'll see some common themes throughout this presentation. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And let's talk about consumers. So how concerned are consumers? We hear a lot, we know a lot, we're consumers ourselves, but what are they thinking, and what are they thinking in terms of healthcare? So from the Klein & Partners study, one of those things that we wanted to look at was what is their level of concern and what are they concerned about? And of course, people are concerned about a family member or themselves contracting coronavirus, but they're also concerned about their financial situation. They're concerned about their safety. They're concerned about their provider's ability to care for them if they're sick. And we can see here that levels of concerns from not concerned at all to very concerned, we have a pretty moderate to higher level of concern in all of these areas. So consumers are concerned. No matter how much they hear about safety and protocols and protection, in the back of their mind, they're thinking about COVID and what does it mean? What's it going to do? And I did want to explain here wave 1 and wave 2. Wave 1 of this research study was at the beginning of COVID. Wave 2 was in early May. So this is fairly recent, but not as recent as where we are right now, as things are starting to open up. Some shelter-in-place orders are being lifted in certain areas. Elective procedures are happening in areas. So, but very interesting information. So let's move on to the next slide. In terms of consumers were asked, when do they think activities would return to normal? And many of them at first thought, you know, it's going to return to normal pretty immediately. And it was apparent as we moved into May, April and May, that things were not going to be as normal as we thought they would. And then you can see that the bulk of people felt like 3 to 6 months, or maybe certain things would never go back to normal, such as shaking hands and different types of social gatherings and things like that. So in the back of consumers' minds, as they're thinking about healthcare, there's all of these other things. It's a new normal. It's always running in the back of their mind. And so I think that's something really important as providers and as healthcare marketers to think about that. What are those consumer perceptions and how do we address those? So the level of concern seeking non-coronavirus care at different healthcare facilities, whether that's a hospital ER, inpatient, an outpatient center, a doctor's office, we can still see that there's a pretty consistent level of concern. Now, we had fewer people who were who'd mentioned that they were concerned about going to the doctor's office as they were the hospital ER. But honestly, consumers who aren't highly educated in the healthcare system don't necessarily know where COVID patients are being treated, and whether that's just in the ER or is every provider seeing COVID patients and treating them. So very interesting data, but just to know that consumers are still very, very concerned about it. And then I think this slide really tells, you know, a communication perspective. What would make you feel more comfortable about going back to a medical facility? Your doctor saying it's safe. So physicians have a really important role in educating patients, but also from a marketing perspective. Whether you're on your website or social media, physicians really need to be speaking out about what they're doing, the protocols, how they're keeping consumers safe. And then there's some others fall behind, but the provider really is who the consumer is looking to hear from. This next slide talks about once restrictions are lifted, when would consumers be comfortable entering a hospital for a medical procedure? And I think the interesting thing here is a very small percentage said immediately, 20% said within a month, but the bulk is they're thinking 3 to 6 months. So we need to be thinking a little bit longer term, especially as we're looking at backlogs of surgeries that physicians are addressing. What's going to happen in the meantime after you get through that backlog, and what's going to happen in that 6 months later? And I think this is a really important number. 6 months have passed or later. You're looking at 80% of healthcare consumers really as your pool of patients. There's going to be 20% lingering out there who may not ever follow through, and we have to find ways to get to those particular consumers. And this is what they're saying. And then in the months after COVID-19 restrictions are lifted, which statement best describes the way that you'll seek care? And I also think that this is interesting. 5% said they wouldn't at all, but the bulk are saying that they're going to seek care for very serious conditions or chronic condition management, as well as 38% said they're going to go back to normal. This is very promising for GERD patients, those with chronic GERD looking to address those particular issues. But we do need to take a look at how we can get to those folks who are a little apprehensive about seeking medical care and delaying care, because that's going to be the big issue, is delayed care. So what will healthcare consumers respond to? So how do we actually reach these consumers who are fearful and apprehensive? And the research showed one thing, and we're hearing a lot, it's going to be a common theme. You may be doing this already, and if you're not doing it, we would highly recommend it, is having a virtual visit option. So we saw between April and May, virtual visits shot way up. It's becoming the new normal. And as we look at beyond COVID, virtual visits are something that consumers are expecting to continue with. So very, very important.
Thank you, Rob, for your presentation. I appreciate that. We're going to get to the next presentation. So let's see, Bob, are you ready to share your screen? Thank you.
Sure. So continuing on the theme of Rob and talking about consumers, from the paradigm of 83 bar and how we interface with endogastric and your practices and what we see with the consumers. We call it the big reset, as we're sort of resetting both expectations of everyone in the medical system, from the patients to physicians and everyone involved. A little bit about 83 bar background for people who don't know. We focus on device diagnostic and pharma patient activation, educating and preparing patients so that they are prepared to make a decision. We work both on the commercial and clinical trial side. We handle about 20,000 patient inquiries a month, and we have a group of about 50 nurses, RNs on the phone in our patient contact center. We handle about 75,000 conversations a month, so we have a pretty good pulse on what's going on. I think there's 4 key drivers that we're seeing now through the COVID process and starting to come through the reopening. The first driver is that patients really have time during the quarantine. And we're seeing it in some different behavior and how they're acting. And I'll walk through that in the next couple of slides. We're seeing an inward focus. People actually have the time to actually think about what they want to do. And I think for the first time, as we all listen to the news media and sometimes get scared out of our minds, what we realize is the one thing that we can do is be the healthiest person we can be and have the least amount of issues. And if that's the case, and we can do that, we have our best shot at, even if we do contract the conditions or the diseases, that we have the best ability to be successful coming out of them. So there's a lot of inward focus about how do I get healthy and how do I take care of issues. There's also people who have more schedule control than ever. We're seeing people schedule quicker, and show up rates increasing. And there's also, as Rob was alluding to, there's a lot of research being done. The WebMD and all of the search functions are at their highest utilization in years in terms of healthcare and medical searches, in particular for chronic conditions. So all of those attributes are leading to 4 key trends that we're seeing in the market. Momentum continues to be key. what we find is that patients, because they have the time and because everything is sort of compressed now and they're worried about being their best possible health, that they, once they start something, they want to complete it as quickly as possible. And they don't want to start and stop. That continues to be a key driving trend. Second of all, attention, focus, and intent has increased remarkably. And you'll see it in some of the actions that we see in some of your prospective patients. The telehealth dependency has become stronger. I think if anything, COVID has clearly pushed the trend of telehealth into the forefront. It's the kick in the pants that probably accelerated a year or two. It was coming regardless, and now it's here, and there's not much anybody can do to stop it at this point. And lastly, we're seeing the age of the empowered patient. There's more research, more questions, more thinking about what they're going to do, and more taking action than we've seen in the past 5 years since we've been engaging clients on behalf of device and diagnostic companies. So with that, I think we'll take a look at the momentum. And momentum, it's about being in the moment. And the idea is right from the initial contact we have with the patient. So when we're in the market and we're looking for prospective patients that have GERD issues and want to do something about it, one of the things that happens is when they fill out a form or they find an ad, they want to be contacted immediately. If somebody fills out a form at 6 o'clock at night, they don't want to call at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when they're in the middle of a meeting. And so you can clearly see that we focus on trying to be within that first 5 minutes from somebody fills out a form. And you can clearly see that we will get about 30% higher return rate if we can make that call quickly and we get in touch with the patient quickly. The ability to get them to answer the phone 24 to 48 hours out is we lose 50% of the patient flow. So it's really key to be in the moment. And the reason this is important is it sort of starts setting the paradigm with the patient. If they have a question and they give you the time to fill out the information and ask for your help, and we respond quickly, we're responsive, and we're an extension of you. And so what we want to do is we want to be as responsive as possible, to be as respectful as possible for their time. And then as we pass them off, we want to make sure that we're passing them off to you to make sure we can compress the time as quickly as possible. Secondly, the reason why we're also focused on being fast is you can see we have, and this is data over like 1,500 appointments that we've set in last year, but you can see 26% of the initial calls. So if we get somebody on the call, the first call we make, we set one out of every 4 patients sets an appointment. And out of that, we cocked 1 out of every 4 patients. And then we set an appointment for about 6%. And you can see what happens is as you lose momentum, as the days go by and someone goes back to work, we have 5 times, almost 6 times the amount of patients will set an appointment if we get them on the first call than the second call. And you can see how that fades out over time and over hours. So it's really important to us to be in the moment with them. And then continuing into your practice, we see this is data from, we pulled 8,619 scheduled appointments over the past year. And you can see that if a patient gets scheduled that day or the next day, our show-up rate is somewhere in the north of 60%, drops into the 40% range, and runs a long tail out into about 20% range once we get pretty far out. Now, this is across all our clients, so this isn't specific to you or the GERD process, but it runs, this analogy might be a little bit different in how many people actually follow through. But the reality to it is across all of the elective surgeries, this long tail, the further out they have to wait for the first appointment, the lower the show-up rate. Probably not too surprising. So how has attention and focused intent increased? Well, in your campaign, what we've seen, our average contact rate when we find prospective patients, contact rate for us is when someone fills out a form and gives us their information, how many of these people do we actually get on the phone? Because people who give you the information and then take a phone call from a nurse they don't know and spend on average 16, 17 minutes on the phone with them is a very valid and very qualified patient. So pre-COVID, we were getting about 32% of the patients we'd get on that first phone call, and now we're getting 43%. So the attention rate, and people are paying much more inward attention and much more involved. And we're also seeing that in terms of the ones who want to move forward. That's been the biggest jump, 36% before, 65 now. And you can see the days to actually getting the first consult, we've been able to compress them using telehealth as you've morphed that into your system from 27 to 14. So all of the data is going the right direction, and all of it's telling us the right story. And it's telling us the story of maintaining momentum and maintaining focus. We're seeing this across the landscape. Just I threw the slide in here just to let you know that even in clinical trials, same thing, pre-COVID, post-COVID, we're getting much more attention, and diagnostics as well. And then people are specifically deciding to move forward with appointments. Even if they can't get scheduled yet, they're asking us to make sure they get scheduled as soon as they can. So there's a very inward focus in the population as a whole, trying to make sure that this is a time period when they could use this time to actually make sure that they're the healthiest they can be. Third, telehealth dependency. I use this example because I think it's a very apropos example. We have two clients. One's a pre-diabetes program. It runs completely in person. You have to come and show up 4 or 5 times a year. It's a management of keeping somebody from pre-diabetes from flipping into full-blown type 2 diabetes. Because we continue to run that program and it does not include any telehealth, what we've seen this year is a churn rate of about 43%. So 43% of the patients who start this subscription model are dropping out by the end of the year. However, we have a very similar program with that focuses around hypothyroidism. That's a combination of telehealth and in-person lab visits. And since they switched to telehealth with the front end, just similar to what you're doing in your process, the churn rate has dropped to below 10%. It's actually running at about 8.5% now. So that tells you very clearly that the consumers are now valuing the point of not having to show up, not being afraid to show up in a location they're not sure about, and also not being inconvenienced to have to show up at a periodic basis. Now, that's not possible for all elective surgeries, but it is possible for parts of the process. And I think it's really important that we try to figure out how to continually ingrain this, and I know that's going to be the next topic. And then finally, the question is this temporary? Are we thinking about this because it's all temporary? And is it really worth making all these big changes? Well, the one driving factor that we see that we think is a game changer is that the current trend is for the larger, better insured employers, the ones that have the plans that drive all of our businesses and they make everything work. A lot of these companies have now survived the last 2 to 3 months with employees at home. The Amazons, the Kraft Foods, all of the big employers have now seen that the world of virtual workforce will actually physically function and work for the most part. It doesn't work in every company, but it will work in some of the larger companies and some of the better paying and better benefits companies. And so what you're seeing is a rapid adoption of working from home, reduced work weeks, partial work weeks in the office, partial work weeks at not. Amazon's now telling people don't come back until January. Facebook's following up. All of the tech companies are doing it, and we're seeing it permeate a bunch of the financial industries as well now. So we don't think it's temporary. We think that people are going to continue to have more control over the schedule. We think people are going to be more focused on getting as healthy as they can be as they start to think about maybe wave 3 or maybe wave 2 of the COVID virus that everybody's predicting this winter, and they're trying to get themselves into the best possible position. So we don't think any of this activity that we're now focusing on is a waste. We think it's actually beneficial and accretive to where we will all benefit. And then finally, the age of the empowered patient. And as many of you know, the process of taking a patient that we do is we find patients in the marketplace that self-select in. So they see an ad, they fill out 15, 20, 30 questions as we walk them through. They provide us with a ton of personal information. They exchange their personal currency. What's more important than money right now on the web? It's giving somebody the permission to contact you. And so the patients give you permission to contact you. They talk to a nurse they don't know. They ask for information. They get pre-qualified, and then they agree to move forward. What we like to think of that is as you're ramping up your practices and as you're starting to return to normal, you have choices. And the choice is you have limited availability and limited throughput that you're going to be able to take care of. Our suggestion, what we've seen is our conversion rates are the best when we have educated and prepared and ready to move forward patients. Those patients take the least amount of time, create the least amount of friction, and process quicker than a patient where you have to start from square zero with. So you just, as you're starting to think through, how do I allocate, how do I sort out my time, how do I ration my time, and who gets slots and availability, it's just something to think about. What's the pre-work that's been done on these patients, and how well will they go through the system? How can I help the most amount of patients in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of resources until we come fully back online? So that's what I leave you with today, is just begin to think about that as you start to spin back up into full capacity. Andrea?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate it. So I just want to apologize before we move on. Rob Gerdon's internet in Seattle kind of took a kaput. So unfortunately, he did try to get back on, but we're going to just keep moving forward. I thank you, Bob, for walking through. There was a lot of information here that was somewhat similar to what Rob was going to present. So moving on, I think one of the big takeaways is not just from Rob's presentation, but from yours, Bob, was the fact that virtual visits and appointments and patients being engaged during this time, patients are still engaged, GERD patients are still engaged.
Absolutely.
And telehealth is making a difference. And Dr. Ayub is a perfect example of how that is working in his practice with his GERD patients. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to you, Dr. Ayub, so you can talk a little bit more about how that's impacted your practice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to focus mostly on telemedicine. It's used in reflux program. I'll also touch on 83 bar, its role in referring patients and starting or telemedicine program, especially as it concerns the reflux patients. So I am a gastroenterologist. I specialize in advanced endoscopy. My main areas of focus include diseases of esophagus, mainly reflux disease and Barrett's esophagus. I also work a lot with GI oncology, pancreas, and biliary tract disease. With the esophagus, I have, fortunately, available to me a wide array of diagnostic and therapeutic options. So I do all sorts of diagnostic tests, including confocal endomicroscopy, endoflip, manometry, esophageal manometry, and Bravo pH testing, along with the general endoscopy. I also have therapeutic abilities, including TIF. I go to 4 different hospitals, and I'm proud to say that TIF is now available at all 4 hospitals that I go to. I also have skill set and perform other procedures, including anti-reflux mucosectomy, resection and plication, and the so-called MAZE procedure, or mucosal ablation and suturing endoscopic for patients with partial sleeve gastrectomy. So having said that, my practice is located in southwest suburbs of Chicago. I always had interest in diseases of esophagus, so I got trained in TIF procedure very early. Actually, in late 2008, I was flown to Seattle and got training on TIF procedure. I did my first procedure in 2009, and after that, performing TIF was, to be honest, a bumpy ride. I was doing only a few procedures a year. You required prior authorization. There was no code, so it was difficult. Came 2017, 10 years after TIF was approved by FDA. 2017, Medicare approved a reimbursement code and started reimbursing for TIF. And that led to floodgates open, and our volumes have increased dramatically. Everybody has started doing TIF now because you get reimbursed for what you do. Benefits of TIF procedure are many. I looked at the list today, and I see there's many of you are gastroenterologists, and some are bigger experts than me. So probably would like to hear their perspective at the end. But TIF is, as the name indicates, it's an incisionless procedure. With no incision involved, there is less risk of complications like bleeding and infection. There's also less pain and faster recovery time. And to me, it's an endoscopic procedure. As an advanced endoscopist, I like to provide care to my patients myself if I can, rather than referring them to a surgeon or someone else. So with TIF, I perform endoscopic therapy. We also partner with surgeons. Two of my hospital surgeons, laparoscopic surgeons, partner with me, so they do the combined CTIF procedure that Andrea mentioned earlier. And that is very successful in patients that require that procedure. There is a selection criteria for TIF and for CTIF, and I would not be going over that. My role today is to talk mostly about telemedicine and how to work up these patients on telemedicine. GERD consultations in my office, they really look like consultation in any other gastroenterologist office. We used to do in-office visit, take a detailed history and physical, and then do pretty standard workup that most of the gastroenterologists would do, including endoscopy to grade the flap valve, do the Hill grading, and to measure the hiatal hernia, and then decide what the best course of action would be, including, if required, Bravo pH monitoring, esophageal manometry, or endoflip if needed. Nowadays, more and more, I'm using endoflip in lieu of manometry, and less patients, in my practice at least, undergo manometry, and many of the tertiary centers are doing the same. So my practice, GERD consultation, similar to most of you, but with one exception, that since March 20, majority, about more than 90% of my initial consultation follow-up visits are via telehealth. So we are calling the patient, we don't see them in the office. So the whole story started with participating in Endogastric Solutions National Direct-to-Consumer Program, the program in November this year. The goals of this program are similar to my mission, which was to raise awareness GERD, educate consumers about GERD and management options, and connect them to TIF-trained physicians. So when I joined this program, it was really a dream come true for me. They basically start with an ad campaign that is with the help of 83 Bar. You heard about it from Bob in detail, but they do Facebook ad, Google search campaigns, and other marketing campaigns. They go into targeted areas. So for my practice, they targeted the location where my offices are, New Lenox, Oak Lawn, and Joliet area, and the areas surrounding that region. Potential reach, I was told by program, 630,000 patients who were Facebook and Google search users in this area. The average age, 35 to 65 plus year, and all genders were included in this program. Results to date for my practice, these are results just over a week ago, so pretty new. I think we might have received few more referrals since, but 73 leads educated by nurse navigators from 83 Bar program were referred to us in total. 30 of these leads requested to be handed off to our practice, so the telephone call after the nurse navigator spoke to them was transferred to our office. 43 leads were given practice contact info, so they were given our phone number. And as Bob mentioned, as the minutes slipped by, the interest level of these patients dropped down, and few days later, they never really call you. So you have to get them when the iron is hot, as they say. We have made 26 appointments through this program so far. And many of these have undergone endoscopies, workup for TIF, and are in final processes for the procedure. How did we leverage this to telemedicine during COVID-19 pandemic? And that was one of my major tasks today to discuss. So now that we already have patients on the phone, what we did was we got some more information that I'll discuss later. We built a team that would develop and execute this telemedicine program, including myself. And I really have to confess, I played very minimal part. I'm fortunate to have two very bright physician assistants, Amy and Jessica, who took the lead. I have several MAs, RN, and a scheduler, and then I have a special person in Caitlin who does wear many hats and took in dealing with 83 bar and the gut health program. So with this full team effort, we were very successful in getting these patient telemedicine appointments, make visits, turn them into endoscopic procedures, workup for the TIF, and then moving on to TIF. Things we learned along the way was that telemedicine does require a learning curve. It's trial and error with system platforms and new technology. As I confess, I'm no expert in telemedicine. And as someone said, we are building this ship as we sail it. So there are changes happening every day in telemedicine. A few weeks ago, we learned that telephone calls will be reimbursed the same rate as telehealth or video conference. Before that, telephone was really not much reimbursement. So things are changing every few weeks because of the COVID pandemic as well, and we are learning as we sail this ship. There are variations with patients as well. Some patients, some of my patients have flip phones. They can't even text. Other patients have modern technology and are masters and geeks at video conferencing and conference calls. So there are all sorts of patients, and we don't choose. We basically deal with what we get here. So we need to be able to deal with different technologies, different level of understanding of these patients. There are some advantages and disadvantages or losses and wins. The disadvantages include, first and foremost, is to ensure that patient understands a telemedicine visit is actually an appointment in lieu of their office visit. It's not just a phone call. Some patients don't understand that, so we have to get the consent explained to them first that, hey, this is the visit. Then we can take vital signs or perform physical exams, so that is a handicap in some patients, especially in patients with abdominal issues. With patients with GERD, for most part, I am pretty happy with telemedicine visit. They do not require physical exam and are pretty okay. It's also hard to use diagrams and models to teach the patient. So I always say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I like to show them pictures and models. I have a model sitting here right now where I can show them exactly where a lesion lies on the model, how big their hiatal hernia is, or what does hiatal or loose flap valve, sorry, what that loose flap valve looks like. So those models or pictures are not available. We can use pictures, but are much harder to use compared to physical presence, just draw a model or do things. On the positive side, the wait times do not matter. So I have a busy practice, and unfortunately, I tend to run late. 15 to 30 minutes wait is very common for my clinic patients. And it's hard to wait when you're lying in a physician exam room or physician wait room. But now, patients sitting at home, sipping on their coffee or a glass of wine, preferably, watching TV, 15, 30 minutes delay does not really matter to them. So patient satisfaction, I think, has improved. Other issue used to be the long distance. I get patients from out of state too. I'm fortunate several of my patients come from Iowa, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And for those patients, long distance telemedicine visit is not a barrier. They still have to come for one procedure. I try to do everything in one procedure. When they come for endoscopy, I perform Bravo, manometry, or endoflip, whatever, in that single visit, and then start getting prior authorization for TIF or CTIF or what have you. But long distance has not been a barrier, or that barrier basically has become a non-issue for us. Patient no-show rates have declined as well. Previously, for patients who have difficulty driving or finding a driver was a problem. So we used to have 10, 20% or sometimes higher no-show rate. That rate has declined considerably now. And also the direct-to-consumer campaign and thus our telemedicine practice is not interrupted by current pandemic or other such issues, bad weather. I live in Chicagoland, and you can get 4 seasons in one day in Chicago. So this is not California or Florida. So bad weather or pandemics do not interrupt telemedicine visit for most part. So as it says here on the small box, converting to telemedicine was really a team effort. We required system platforms. It is dependent on patients' access to technology and patient preferences. Some patients like to use Google, Skype, or Zoom. Other patient, one of my female patients told me recently, oh, she doesn't have her makeup on, does not want the video. She would just talk on the phone. So they have the choice and they can do what they like. We implemented telemedicine on March 20th this year after the governor announced a lockdown in Illinois. And now, as I mentioned, more than 90% of visits are via telemedicine. During COVID-19 pandemic, we continue to get referrals from 83 bar. As Bob just mentioned, my previous speaker, really patients had more time to look inwards, look at their health, more concerned about their health. So we continue to get referrals, and business, though in other areas was affected, procedures volumes dropped, but the referrals for telemedicine, fortunately, did not drop much at all. Patient registration and scheduling for initial evaluation has not changed much. So that we used to call the patient, MA would call, schedule a phone call appointment for an office visit and enter the visit in EMR. Now they schedule a televisit. However, now the appointment platform is determined at the time of initial call. So my MA, when she calls the patient to make a telemedicine appointment with me or one of my PAs, she asks the patient whether they would like to use Skype, Zoom, Duo, or some other platform, or just a simple phone call. And that is entered in the electronic medical record. The initial evaluation for televisit starts with the MA calling the patient, going over their chief complaint, their past history, family history, medication. All those data are entered into the electronic medical record. We use GMed here. Some other physicians I know use eClinical or other electronic records. The MA then passes on the information to PA or myself, and then we take it from there and finish the telehealth visit, ending in a recommendation, which might be, say, an endoscopy with 96-hour Bravo, or endoscopy with endoflip, planimetry, etc. Then the MA sends a fax to the desired hospital for that procedure. Those procedures, as you know, during the lockdown were routine procedures, were not being performed, at least in my state. But now they're open. We have started doing the diagnostic procedures, and we have done some TIFs as well since the lockdown Illinois Department of Public Health loosened the restrictions. We did TIF 2 weeks ago and have more planned in the coming weeks. Typically, after the procedure, we arrange a telemedicine follow-up in 2 to 3 weeks with the PA or physician. It can be in-office visit if deemed necessary or if patient so wishes. But in my experience, more than 90% of patients want a televisit. They like it that way, and my PAs like it too. So converting to telemedicine took us about a week or two. The degree of difficulty, I'm told, was easy to moderate, but we were able to adapt to it within a week or two. So I would say for new technology, having changed our electronic medical records and adapted to other technologies in the hospital in the past, a week or two is a very short time. So it's much easier than getting a new EMR or your hospital getting, say, Epic or Cerner or some other medical record system. Where do I see it going in future? I think that telemedicine is here to stay. COVID or no COVID. Once COVID is gone, we have vaccine, or there was no COVID. If you wake up tomorrow, telemedicine will stay for a lot of visits, a lot of follow-up visits. Many times I personally like to see the patient. I like to explain things in the office, but my PAs love it. They like the telemedicine. So I think that for initial visits, but more so for follow-up visits, it will stay, and the use will only expand with time. When we do telemedicine visit, I wanted to show you a real-life example. This is a patient I did at 2 o'clock today at Advocate Christ Medical Center. the history physical that I had. I've cut off patient's name, but a patient was seen by Jessica, my PA. In the chief complaint, you have to mention that telemedicine conversion due to coronavirus emergency, that is a requirement. And then when you go to physical exam, we say physical exam not performed due to telephone visit. We do mention weight and height if we have it from previous visit or if patient can give you the weight and height. In the assessment plan section before billing, you have to enter the telemedicine time. This includes the physician or qualified health provider time. We also include MA's time. Total evaluation time for the initial visit here was 30 plus minutes. And in the notes, we mentioned that this was a telemedicine visit in lieu of in-person visit due to coronavirus emergency. There is a lingo that is basically cut and paste into every visit, the same lingo. So we have to enter that. So I'm going to stop here. I think telemedicine and partnership with GERD Help has been a great experience for us, a positive experience, and I hope to see our partnership growing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayub. That was very insightful, and I'm sure that the audience appreciates all of the good information and actual examples of how that's working in your practice. So we're going to go ahead and go to our next speaker, Dr. Ihde. He is going to talk a little bit about getting back to the new normal. So go ahead and take it away, Dr. Ihde.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for asking me to speak. We're going to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and how it affected my hospital. I am at a relatively small hospital, 58 beds, but we were the first COVID-19 death in Texas. And really on the morning of March 14th, everybody was like, well, we may never even see it. And then by the 19th, everything was shut down completely. And so we're going to kind of review our actions, but also realize, this is an ongoing process. And we are still working on getting through to fully inpatient cases. So the first thing we did is that we initiated a COVID-19 committee. I myself was not completely on it, but as chief of surgery, I attended nearly every meeting. The first concern, of course, we all had was that we were going to run out of the personal protection equipment. And so much of it is used in the operating room that it made sense to close down the operating room to elective cases. And of course, more than 90% of our cases are elective. So that significantly changed the workload on the hospital, staffing issues, and those sorts of things. We realized once we sat down that much of our operating equipment was reusable, so that wasn't so much of an issue. But if we were going to get overwhelmed by the numbers, we needed the PPE. A big challenge for us was daily rescheduling of our nursing staff, and that had to do with the first exposure. It was a nurse that had traveled out of town, had some home health patients as well as some nursing home patients. And our first patient was an elderly man that came in, and he subsequently succumbed to the disease. And then she was the second patient. He had actually come in with a respiratory illness, was sent home, and then came back 2 days later and was obviously worse. We decided that we needed some sort of strategy to avoid excessive use of masks and gowns and those sorts of things. And so we came up with some innovative things. We took a full face snorkel mask. We had seen this on the internet, and 3D printed out an adapter that would go to the vent filter like we use on our ambu bags and our ventilators. We also had some UVC lights shipped in and created a box, just a rough box that we could place under UVC light. The thought was we would be able to sterilize at least hard surface equipment. There's been some controversy with that, but everybody was sort of making it up as we went along. So here you can see at the top right the 3D printed cartridge where you can open the cartridge and add filter material. At the bottom, you see the adapter that goes to the vent filter. And this completely covers the face, the eyes, the nose, everything. They're a little bit hard to communicate with, but you do feel pretty safe in it. And then the UVC box. You know, if you wipe down your mask and you feel like, well, I want to get some a little bit more sterilization, you can put it in the UVC box. So we had one in the OR, one on the floor, and this one at home. Once we started seeing numbers stabilize and the Texas board allowed us to think about reopening, we had to come up with a strategy for returning to the operating room. Of course, we're worried about patients surreptitiously bringing the virus into the hospital, so testing became a necessity. We were really using a 4-day test initially, and we did get one of the Cepheid 15-minute tests available, and we've been using that in the last couple of weeks. The second concern was, are the patients going to get the virus while they're in the hospital? We were averaging 10 inpatients per day. We did not want to have to admit somebody if we didn't need to and possibly inadvertently expose them. And so between these two issues, we had to figure out workflow. How are we going to bring the patients in? We limited it really to entry only by the emergency room or for elective testing, x-rays, that sort of thing, through a side door where we were able to organize the patient coming in, provide a test for them, wait for the test in the 15-minute test case, and then let them proceed through the hospital to their area. So our phase-in strategy began with that we were going to test everybody once we had the 15-minute test. We were not going to allow visitors to come in, and the exception there was for deliveries. The OBGYNs were pretty insistent that they didn't have just one patient in the mother or two patients in the mother and the infant, but the entire family. And so we made some allocations for that. From the hospital side, we only wanted one person in the room with the patient at a time with a mask, where in the past we had sort of a swarm type strategy where somebody would come in and you try to get the H&P done, and you try to get nursing charting done, and you try to get IV and antibiotics and all that sort of stuff as soon as possible so we can move people through. Now we had to do that one at a time. We made the allowance for the full face masks for positive cases. We did have N95s, and for those who elected to use N95s, they had face shields as well. And then we looked at the OR room because typically it's a positive pressure environment, and that would be pushing potentially contaminated air into common areas. We decided to turn the OR into sort of an isolation room, which once we were in, we covered the doors with plastic. We added intake filters to the air handler so virus didn't get into the central system. And we were able to really create a pressurized environment within the room, but transport all the air through a filtered system. And then, of course, once the patient was intubated, you had control of their airway and secretions. We all remained in masks. Then we had to decide if, number one, the protocols that we had put together were going to work. In other words, were we going to avoid transfer of virus from one person to another? And that's going to require you to try out the strategy. And so we wanted to start with very simple things, outpatient cases that had very, very little risk of admission. And so naturally we turned to endoscopy. And then of course we have a small hospital, only 2 patients per morning and 2 patients per afternoon to test the protocol, look for unforeseen issues, make corrections. So for instance, where were we going to put the chart? Were we going to put it in the room, or is it going to stay out on the desk? We created a check sheet for people who saw the patient, so we knew for sure, have they been seen by the nurse? Have they been seen by the tech? Have they been seen by anesthesia? Have they undergone their testing? What was their test result? And limit traffic by understanding who had already seen the patient. Once we had done that in the first week, it actually went pretty well. We made some changes, but it went pretty well. In week 2, we started doing outpatient cases, low risk of admission. Lap choles are a good example. And again, 2 patients in the morning, 2 patients in the afternoon. One of the fears that we had is that if we did get a second wave or an outbreak amongst the nursing staff, we're a small facility. We don't have a large enough staff to absorb losing too many nursing staff. And so exposing 3 or 4 or 5 nurses even in the hospital could really affect the hospital's functioning. So we had to make sure that all of these were working, and one way in which we did it is to limit how many patients we were doing per day per physician. And of course, each physician has kind of their day of the week to work. In week 3, by week 3, we'd felt like things were going pretty well. We were getting test results back. We felt good about the test results. We had worked out our workflow. The outpatient cases with a higher risk of overnight stay then we could start doing, and look at planned one-night stays. So of course, this is where many of our TIF patients would be, a hiatal hernia repair with TIF even. We were now scheduling patients so we could do the COVID-19 testing at PAT, and that allowed us to save some of the 15-minute tests and use the 4-day tests, and then we increased the number of cases per physician. And then in the next week, pretty much open to all elective inpatient cases, 4 cases per day per physician. What we did save then was ENT and eye cases, cataracts, where you would have a lot of patients coming in, quicker turnover, and in week 6, pain cases in which they come in, their case is basically 15 minutes and they're out. They're seen pretty much every week, and so then the question became up, well, if they tested negative once, how long is that test good for? And we decided the test would be good for a week. And so that was our strategy for sort of phasing things in. This is sort of how our results looked like as things moved through the system. It looks like we had a spike at the end of March, beginning of April, but those are really the beginning of the testing come in, and you can see towards the end we had almost no cases reported, and then a couple came in. Positive cases trending down, and 18-day blocks. So this is just a look at a little bit of the data, how we had that initial wave, and it's been declining since, and we think we have a pretty good hold on the strategy that will keep us from having more cases or recurrent cases. So things to think about a little bit. What is it exactly that has worked? We had a significant reduction in deaths compared to the initial predictions, and models are computer algorithms, so data in equals data out. And so part of the problem was we didn't have a lot of good data to start with. Maybe we have better data, and maybe that's all that has changed. But again, maybe we have figured out a way to limit viral transmission. There's no school, there's a limit on work. Was it the masks that helped? There's a theory out there that with a mask, even if you go to touch your face or rub your nose, whatever is on your hand is getting off on the mask and not into your airway. Is it the 6-foot rule? We see all kinds of reaction to gatherings in which this is violated. But how good is the 6-foot rule? We know that there's a variety of tests that have done that show a plume can spread quite a bit farther than that. There are some countries that really did nothing. So maybe it was just a matter of the virus getting into the population, developing some immunity, although those that do the models feel like that's not the case. At some point, when are we going to stop testing everybody? This last week, we had 2 new cases. I think we're going to be testing people for a little bit, but at what point do we stop? At what point do we consider that we've restarted as well? I mean, if we're looking at a second wave and we're trying to plot that data, I mean, when's the starting point? When are we going to get antigen testing? That's going to tell us, okay, who's been exposed, and then are we going to know whether that confers immunity or not? There's been a lot of talk about a second wave, but as things have gotten started, we really haven't seen that at this point. It's more of a trickle, but you never know. With a 14-day incubation period, it could be next week before we see things. So those are the things that I think that we have to consider. We'll see what happens from here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Ihde, for sharing that very interesting insight and protocols that you have set up. I got the chills when you told us you had the first COVID patient or death in Texas. Being in Texas here too kind of hit me hard.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very crazy time, as we all know. I do have quite a few questions for everybody. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to go ahead. So you didn't get to hear all of Rob's presentation, but at the end of the day, we all know GERD symptoms don't stop just because there's a pandemic, right? And we are definitely finding, and we know from all of these campaigns that we're doing, and also from all the social media platforms that we're on, we're hearing that these patients are looking for help. And whether or not you guys are able to do telehealth or able to get them in for a initial consult, what are the things that you're doing to help alleviate the fear of coming into the practice to come in for initial consult or come in for their diagnostic testings? Do you guys have a communication plan, or are there things that you're putting on your website? Are you sending out emails that are letting them know, we're taking all the precautions that we need to so we can see you safely? What types of things are you guys? This is for you, Dr. Ihde and Dr. Ayub.
So our hospital has a fairly regular broadcast to the community, press release, if you want to call it. We use a variety of forums. Our group has its own Facebook page that people could go to. And so we've set up some protocols. So for instance, we're in a single building where we have a multitude of providers. We have to be sure the patients show up right at the right time for their appointments. We separate people out in the waiting room. There's not a crowd in the waiting room. People are escorted in and escorted out. Everybody has, there's hand sanitizer everywhere, and everybody is wearing masks at all time a patient is around. So it's been a fairly regimented process at our facility.
Okay.
More or less similar process. We are doing more telemedicine, so patients don't even come into the office. Those few who do, or MA with an N95 mask visits them in the car, checks their temperature. Before they come, they're asked about COVID symptoms, including cough, loss of taste, shortness of breath, fever, etc. And basically anyone with symptoms are told to go to emergency room, not come to the office. Once the patient comes in, as Dr. Ihde said, there is hand sanitizer everywhere. The office, we tell the patient as well, is deep cleaned with Lysol and all the chemicals every day. We are very careful to try and make it a safe environment for us and the patients. But we are encouraging telemedicine, and as I mentioned, more than 90% of patients would be seen from home. The hospital, when it comes to hospital, our hospital checks for COVID 3 days before, PCR-based test that's more than 98% sensitive, very accurate. And we do same 3 days before, and then patient is placed in quarantine, self-quarantine for 3 days before they come for their, say, TIF procedure or endoscopy with Bravo or what have you. So the hospitals are also advertising that the place is safe. TIF patients are kept on a separate negative pressure floor. Any TIF patient endoscopies are done in a separate room, which is a negative pressure room, and all those precautions per CDC guidelines are carried out to the teeth and more. So we try to make sure that patients are satisfied, understand that the place is safe, we are working in a safe environment.
Wonderful. Thank you both. So one of the other big topics, or if you will, is some of the GERD symptoms that patients feel mimic a little bit of COVID, right? The shortness of breath, the coughing. And so there's a lot of patients that are coming into either calling the ER or going into the ER or going, calling their general practitioner. What types of, are you seeing any referral patterns change between, physicians that are seeing a lot of these patients, whether these patients are highly stressed because of COVID or whatnot, or their symptoms are getting worse, or they feel like they're getting worse, or coming in, and they're finding out it's GERD. So are you doing, are there any referral patterns with your physician referrals? Are you letting them know you're doing telemedicine if they find someone that has those types of symptoms and they're almost thinking, yeah, it's probably GERD, you should go see, Dr. Ayub or a gastroenterologist? What are you seeing in that realm?
So we are seeing a lot of false alarms due to cough and shortness of breath. Many patients come and say that, I used to have cough, but it's gotten worse now, and I'm worried it might be COVID. And those patients, we tell them to get a COVID test done first. Okay. There is a huge, huge value to a negative COVID test. It provides a lot of mental relief and satisfaction for the patient. It's really the main treatment. And then, obviously, we embark upon a journey with the workup for GERD patients, including endoscopy, manometry, Bravo if needed, and progress on to TIF, CTIF, or what have you. So, but initially, we try to reassure the patient and get the COVID test done, because COVID can be asymptomatic, symptoms can be mild. Just like there's a huge spectrum of reflux disease, from non-erosive reflux disease to severe stricturing form in Barrett's and carcinoma esophagus, there is a big spectrum of COVID-19 disease. Many patients are asymptomatic, and others have mild illness, others have severe illness. So we do take it seriously, try to do the COVID test, rule that out first, and then move on with the reflux workup.
That makes sense.
Yeah, our community is pretty close-knit, and so we all communicate with each other on almost a daily basis, so they know exactly what I'm doing, and I know what they're doing. And I have had a patient come in, very much like you say, a lot of respiratory symptoms, and we're actually saying, well, maybe this isn't your reflux, maybe it's something else, especially if you had a fever the other day, and
right.
Have sent 1 or 2 patients to the emergency room to get worked up for COVID. And fortunately, they were negative. But overall, the process has been fairly close to what it was before this. And so, things are back into the swing of it. We have, a pipeline that we have to keep up in order to get patients worked up. And for 6-8 weeks that was interrupted, but now they're all lined up again, ready to go.
Fantastic. So are you seeing a huge kind of influx of EGDs and diagnostic testings that are needing to happen because of this pandemic and the stop, or are you able to triage them through your Are you doing telemedicine, Dr. Ihde, yet, or?
Yes, we've been doing virtual visits, but interestingly, and I was going to comment on this, the Texas Medical Board has decided they had to create a special rule to allow that, because the only way they allow telemedicine otherwise is if you have a robot that can do the physical exam. And our hospital has two. But, I mean, how do you do that in the office? So they had to pass a special rule. And just last week, they said that rule is going to come to an end at the end of May. So we will not be able to do telemedicine. So it's interesting. I'm wondering if they're going to reverse that and go back to telemedicine, or, do they see value of that? Is that something we can add to our armamentarium and frankly make medicine a little bit more efficient?
Right.
All of the points Dr. Ayub came up with about patients having to travel and not getting a ride and those sorts of things, those are real issues in my community, because there's a significant poverty to the community in certain corners. And so we deal with those issues every day. So we'll see about the virtual visits. I'm not sure.
Interesting. Bob, since you're on, maybe you can give us a little insight. I know, you guys manage the call center. Maybe let us know a little bit, what are these patients feeling? Are they, when told that there are physicians in their area that offer telehealth or telemedicine, are they more eager to schedule appointments initially because there's still a kind of that fear of going in to see a physician?
Sure, I think
due to
overall,
COVID.
I think overall there's a definite relief when there's a stutter step. I mean, I think there's a whole pent up amount of demand out there where people still fully believe that their only option is to go into a place that they believe is full of sick people, and that the risk is elevated. So the option, when it becomes available, that they have sort of a step to understand and learn what they need to know without having to go into that environment, whether it's perceived or real or not, which it's not, but it's a perception, because they watch. All you got to do is turn your TV on most days, and you won't want to leave your house for the next 20 years. But
Right.
I think there's a large sense of relief with it when that is something we can offer. The other thing we're also seeing is just people want, on average, our phone calls run somewhere across the board between 15 and 16 minutes. We're pushing 18 minutes now, and you could just see when you do the amount of volume we do on phone calls, you could just see people wanting to have a human connection. They're stuck in their house. They're worried. They're trying to figure it out. They're worried about doing something could be as dangerous as not doing anything. They're trying to contemplate. They're doing way too much research online, finding conflicting, uncurated information. And so, if you're a voice of credibility, whether it's one of your physician partners, whether it's one of our RNs, it's soothing in their ear. And then obviously to give them the next step where we can provide that makes a lot of sense. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but
No, that's fantastic. No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And we do have a question from YouTube. Dr. Ihde and Dr. Ayub, have you had any patients cancel or postpone due to COVID? And then what percentage of patients have had scheduled, decided to cancel?
Go
ahead.
Do you want to take it first, Dr. Ihde?
Well, I've had a couple of patients that have said they want to postpone for 2 or 3 months, but I've also seen the opposite. If patients have come to realize that their health care is a resource that sometimes can be scarce, and so they want to get in and get things done immediately. They're like, "When's your first operating day?"
Right. Okay.
So, regulations or delays, postponements basically, to many patients say, "Hey doc, I'm afraid, don't want to come into the hospital now," and that's okay. We have postponed at least 30% or so patients, in my opinion. I'm guessing about 30%, they delay it by a few months. They want things to settle down with this COVID pandemic and then come to the hospital. These are especially elderly patients who have comorbidity, obesity, sleep apnea, lung diseases, etc., who are more concerned about complications. So
Right.
that's my experience.
Are you seeing any influx or any patients that are worried about insurance, with their job loss, with COVID? Does that concern is that a concern in your community, I guess, with some of your patients?
So I got a call even today from my scheduler that this patient says that she's lost her job. She'll have no insurance by end of June, so she needs her procedure and TIF done by June.
Wow.
All the evaluation and TIF. Normally, our cycle is a little bit longer. We do EGD, Bravo, manometry, etc. first, then get prior. So yes, we are seeing that to some extent. Not a huge number yet, but it started coming in, and I think that with time, we'll be seeing a lot more patients who will say, I'm going to lose my insurance or I've lost my insurance, can't do it now.
Yeah.
We've had the exact same thing, is that patients have come in and said, well, I've been furloughed, I'm laid off, and now I've lost my job. And same thing, end of June is sort of the date. And one of the changes we made last year is that we started using the EndoFlip instead of manometry, because really you're looking for achalasia. So just like Dr. Ayub, we've started using EndoFlip. And it does streamline the workup, and it does make it a little bit more efficient. And I think that's actually helping us now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we're past the hour already. Gosh, all this great talk. So I wanted to just give you guys all an opportunity. If there's anything else you wanted to share, maybe Bob, if there's anything. There was 3 points that Rob had in his presentation. Again, I'm sorry that you didn't get to see it, but it was how can providers generate new patients? And I thought this was really important. One is to proactively market your services online with reassuring messages on how you will deliver care safely. So I think that's really, I believe that that's important. And then being specific in your messaging about what you're going to do to keep them safe, and what the process looks like. So it's all about communication, right? Communication. What can we do to make these patients feel comfortable, make them feel like we can still help, provide help to them, give them treatment options for their GERD symptoms and reflux. And then lastly, he talks about the offering flexibility to improve access and cost. So I guess that goes back to that, can you provide telehealth if these patients are weary about coming in for those initial consults? And then looking into what are things that we can do to potentially help, with those patients that do run into furlough or lose their jobs or whatnot. And I think it's great that they're being proactive and calling you and saying, hey, let's get it all done before I lose it, right? I mean, it sounds silly, but for some patients, it just works. Any other final comments, Bob, that you want to share with everybody that's still watching?
No, I just think the communication is really the big key. I mean, it's just providing fear, reducing the fear will proactively allow people to make decisions. When people are in the state of fear, they freeze and don't make any decisions, and that doesn't help them. It doesn't help anyone else in the audience. So the more we communicate, the less the fear, the more action.
Right. Perfect. Fantastic. Any final thoughts, Dr. Ayub?
Well, I would just like to thank everyone. I think that Endogastric Solutions, I've gone through a lot of different reflux technologies over the last 30 years, from EndoCinch to Strata to others. Endogastric Solution has come up with the magic technology for endoscopic anti-reflux management. They have a great rep system that supports you. So many doctors are afraid to try it, but I would encourage them to take a bite at this apple. There's reps are there with you. Your training program is very, very good. It makes the program very easy to launch this anti-reflux management, and really a reflux center, if you like, based on your providing TIF in your center. So I find it very useful partnership, and I enjoy working with you guys. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Ayub. And Dr. Ihde, first of all, I want to congratulate you on your paper you just published.
Oh, thank you.
But also, was there any other final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
I think along the lines of COVID, what we're all waiting for is the testing to really get filled out so that testing's available and it's quick, and antigen testing. And I think that that's really when we're going to be able to say, we're back, right? Until then, we're all still working in an environment in which we don't have all the data, and we have to be cautious as we move forward.
Right. Well, I can't thank everybody enough for being here tonight and taking your time to share your stories, your insight on everything that's going on with COVID, your reflux program, our marketing efforts. So we appreciate you all being here, and thank you. I did want to mention AFS has an event at 7 p.m. tonight, so in about 40 minutes. I believe Dr. Katz is discussing new data on regarding the surgical, endoscopic, and medical therapy of PPI refractory GERD. So if you can jump on that, another webinar, please do. But again, Dr. Ayub, thank you so much. Dr. Ihde, thank you. Bob, thank you. And I will thank Rob. Unfortunately, he had dropped his internet, but that's life, right? So thank you again for joining us, everybody, tonight. We really appreciate it. Please stay tuned. We try to have a TIF Talk Physician Edition every month. So look for that email invitation for the next one. Everybody have a great evening and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.